Hey guys, it's Nik the Booksmith. Welcome back, welcome back. Perhaps you remember this book that I made a couple videos ago. It was for the Jane Austen July. If you don't remember, that's okay. I can barely remember it myself. During that video, I said that if you guys wanted to see how that cover is made, I would show you how to do that. Well, you did ask, and I remembered that I promised, which is half the battle. So here we are. I have this text block that I have sewn together, and if you want to know how to sew a text block together, like in this video, I will link that down below. This is made with plain paper. The one in the video, I've made more of a junk journal type with lots of random papers. I have a couple of pieces of mat board, and so I'm going to use that to make my book covers out of. So I'm measuring the paper size, which happens to be about 209 millimeters. And I'm going to add about 6 millimeters to that so that I can have an overhang of 3 millimeters for the head and the tail. And that's all I'm going to worry about at this moment, is just that height measurement. This is a pattern that I printed out. It is at my Etsy store. And for those of you on Patreon, I have uploaded that to Patreon if you want to go grab that. And I'm just going to use this pattern. I've got 2 of them for the image on the cover. I am measuring the spine width of this text block, which happens to be almost exactly an inch. It's right between 25 and 26 millimeters. To create a spacer for our spine, I'm going to take that 26 millimeter or 1 inch, and I am going to add to that 1/4 of an inch to either side of that, or if you're using metric, that'd be 6.35 to either side of that. And what that will do is that will allow for hinge gaps for the front and the back cover. So the spacer between these covers ends up being 1.5 inches, or I don't know, what's 25 plus 13. I'm putting this spine gap piece in between these 2 pieces of mat board that will serve for my covers, and I'm going to tape them down with some painter's tape, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out how wide I want my book cover boards to be. Once I get the spacer taped in between the front and back cover boards, I can very carefully peel that spacer out from between them. Then the painter's tape will serve to be for how wide the spine will be when the book cover is finished. And I can put the text block inside this makeshift cover and kind of see how wide I want these front and back cover boards to be. And I usually aim for about 3-4 millimeters past the foredge of the text block. And then I will take a pencil and I will mark about where that is. And then in this way, I can estimate how wide these boards should be, and I can go ahead and cut them down. Then the next thing I do, I will grab these printed pattern pages, and I'm going to cut a couple of pieces out that are just shy of the size of my book cover boards. So perhaps a couple of millimeters shorter and narrower than the book board is. This is kind of personal preference. You can make it even smaller than that if you'd like, but it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to leave that up to you. The next thing I like to do is I'm going to paint the edges of these boards on the front and the back. And because I kind of have a floral design here, I'm going to go with a muted green. Very inexpensive acrylic paint. And once those boards are painted along the edges, front and back, I will set them aside to dry, because before we move on, I would like them to be absolutely completely dry. Our next step is to brush on whichever side is going to be the outside of your book cover. I'm going to brush on a nice even coat of white glue, PVA, Mod Podge, whatever you have laying around should be just fine. I just want to make sure that there aren't any dry spots left try to make it as even as you can. I realize that that's easier said than done, but you get it. And onto that nice even coat of glue, we're going to be adhering those images that we printed out. Of course, you don't have to use a printed image. You could use some patterned cardstock if you have it, or marble paper, handmade paper. I mean, really anything that you'd like. If you're curious about what I printed on some brochure or presentation paper. I have some of my favorites listed on my Amazon, I think it's the Booksmithables list, if you need any recommendations. Next, I'm going to get out a piece of fabric, and this is a linen blend, I think, in this beautiful deep teal. I'm going to give it a little bit of an iron because it's extremely wrinkly for some reason, and then I'll be able to cut out a piece big enough to make my spine. It does take a few extra minutes to brush on this watered down PVA and then let it dry, but it's well worth it because it keeps the fabric from unraveling or raveling. Is it unraveling? Do you ravel or do you unravel? If you ravel, does that add thread to it? And if you unravel it, takes thread away? Huh, what do you think? Next, I'm just going to mark the height of this spine fabric. Then with this tailor's chalk, I'm going to make a line where I made that mark. As you can see, I zigzag stitched around the perimeter and then up to that tailor's chalk line that I made, just because I didn't want to cut it first, because what if the stitching shortened it up a little bit? So I just kind of left myself a little bit of wiggle room just in case. Now that the glue is completely dry underneath these images, I'm taking some fine grit sandpaper and I'm very carefully sanding off the ridge of that paper where it ends on my book cover. I'm also taking off a little bit of the paint on the front and the back just to age it up a little bit. You can go to town on this if you want, but I just wanted to take that little ridge off so that the paper and the book board feel more like one piece and not two pieces glued together. To complete the look, I'm taking some of this Ranger archival ink in coffee. You can use any ink color that you would like, or you can skip this part, whatever you'd like. But I'm going to brush the ink around the edges just to create some definition and to cover up the board where I sanded away the paint and kind of just give it a cohesive look. I did not take the camera outside with me, but I did give these covers a quick spritz of a clear spray paint, like in a matte or a satin. I think it was matte, not satin. Either way, it doesn't matter. But it seals in that ink so that when I go over it with this matte varnish, the ink won't spread across the entire cover. It'll stay where I put it. Next, I'm going to mark the center of my spine fabric because I wanted to put some embellishments on the spine. Using a piece of mixed media paper, I created a little, like a window template so that I can line everything up and make sure that what I want to put on the spine gets centered properly. Now, please don't think that this is totally necessary because it is absolutely not. This is optional. You can just eyeball it. You can leave it off. This is just me being extra. I thought the little oval of pattern paper, looked a little interesting on this scrap of fabric. And now all I have to do is glue it on. And then the next thing I can do is take some of this gold thread and I'm just going to do a running stitch around the edge of that little piece of fabric. And because, I didn't think it looked finished enough, I just poked some holes through the edge of the paper, that little oval piece of paper, so that I could do some more gold stitches around that too. And then I thought some initials would look good on the bottom of the spine, so I warmed up the hot foiling machine. I put the spine spacer back between the covers and put the tape back on. And then this way you know that the front and back cover are the right distance away from each other. And so I can flip that over and attach the spine fabric to the other side. And I know that everything should be spaced correctly. And what I did was, after the spacer was in place, I was able to put the fabric over the top of the spine, and I could measure how much of an overlap there was to the millimeter. From there, it was pretty simple because all I had to do was take a piece of chipboard and I measured out from the spine edge how much I knew that the spine fabric was going to overlap onto the cover. And I weighted down that piece of chipboard, and then that way I knew where to brush on the glue so that I could attach the spine fabric. Once that was done, I was able to take out that spacer and we can fit in our text block, and it fits great. I'm not going to go through that in this video because I did install a text block just like this in the video linked underneath this one. But I just wanted to remind you that once that was done, then we need to glue in the liners on the inside, front, and back cover. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make this kind of book cover, and maybe you feel confident to tackle it in a future bookbinding adventure. But until then, thank you all for hanging out with me today. I hope everybody is having an excellent week, and I will see you all really, really soon in the next video. Bye, guys.